First of all, thank you so much to Judy and the entire Mind Institute for giving me this opportunity and inviting me here. I've had a fantastic day getting a tour of everything that the Institute is doing, which is remarkable, and meeting the wonderful faculty and clinicians and staff and grad students and fellows and learning so much. And I am, as a parent, deeply grateful and thankful. I always say, as a parent, I was drafted, but you guys volunteered. And at every step along the way, on the trajectory the journey I've been on with my son, there have been remarkable people along the way, and this building is filled with them. So thank you. So when Judy invited me, I think I sent her 2 emails saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" I'm not a scientist. So I started to think about what topic would be pertinent and what's on my mind. And so I'm going to talk today, opening a conversation, first of all to say, disclaimer, I have no answers. This is a conversation that is something we all need to be having, I think, for some time, but I would like to invite us all to share in that conversation. Whose story is it? The question of representation as autistic children become adults. So the autism generation has come of age. There was this big surge, a big uptick in the early 90s. My son is about to turn 26, so he was really right there at the crest of the wave of this surge of incidents. Radical increase in 1985, as you can see. So the toddlers who were diagnosed are now in their 20s, progressing into their 30s, and they are mad as hell. Why? So first of all, who am I? I am not a scientist. I'm a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist. I'm the mother of an adult son. Therefore, I'm an expert with 24 years plus of field work. And I teach students at NYU who are autistic, and I'm a member of the community, and I've made several films as a producer of a documentary that's on HBO called Autism the Musical, which I did not direct, but I helped to produce. And then I've directed 2 narrative fiction features that dramatize living with and loving a child with autism. They are love stories, parent-child love stories, in which the given circumstance is autism. So because I'm a storyteller, I'm going to tell you a story. Here's the first part of the story. What you learn when your child is diagnosed. You learn a lot of things. But most of all, you learn that early intervention is critical, brain is most plastic between ages 1 and 3, and your child is probably 2 to 6 years old when the diagnosis is made. So the clock is ticking, and you already lost critical time. Here's what parenting becomes. Naturalistic parenting goes out the window. Your life is doctor's appointments, evaluations, research, ABA floor time. Your house is filled with strangers all day long, coming in and out. You're going to facilitating your play dates. You're getting assessments. You're racking up bills. While your friends are raising their families, you are saving your child's life. Dr. Stanley Greenspan, who is, I worship at the temple of Dr. Stanley Greenspan, who's a wonderful therapist, who I had the privilege to bring my son to meet with when he was a toddler, told me, every waking hour is a therapeutic opportunity. This is not naturalistic parenting. So essentially, you can have your own life, or you can save your child's life. This is the message that you get. There's a very important study that was done a few years ago, in 2009, looking at the stress levels, cortisol levels of mothers with child with autism, and it compared to people with severe PTSD. In other words, mothers of autistic children have stress levels comparable to combat soldiers. But on the other hand, what does childhood become? In the voice of a child with autism, this is what they are learning from a very young age. My impulses must be put on extinction. I'm constantly being corrected. They take away or make me stop doing the things that soothe and calm me. I'm constantly in structured activities, therapy sessions, doctor's appointments. It's really hard. It makes me very tired, anxious, and uncomfortable. And if I complain, they call it a tantrum. I'm never alone. I don't process, understand, follow, or fit in. Something is wrong with me. This is the message that toddlers and children with autism are inherently getting. I am broken, and I must be fixed. Ivor Lovaas was a very important psychologist who developed discrete trial applied behavioral analysis, which became the sort of reigning therapeutic intervention and is still to this day the therapeutic intervention type, modality that insurance companies will recognize and will reimburse. And his famous quote was, "You have a person in the physical sense. They have hair, a nose, a mouth, but they are not people in the psychological sense." I attended a lecture that he gave at UCLA when my son was first diagnosed, and he said basically a paraphrase of this. I got up, I walked out of that lecture, and I stopped doing discrete trial at that time. Although I will say that later on, we came back to it with people who were implementing behavioral therapy in a very beautiful, naturalistic way. But there was Lovas in the 1970s implementing a system where the idea was focus on behaviors that overtly autism-like to discourage stimming, hand flapping. The program slapped, gave electrical shock, children had to repeat drills day after day, etc. Now this was in the early days, but there was an inherent system that did get carried on. In other words, some people on the receiving end experienced applied behavioral analysis therapy as autistic conversion therapy. And now they're able to tell us how that felt. Here are some quotes from adult autistics, which you can read for yourself. ABA is a predatory approach to parents. If you don't work with an ABA provider, your child has no hope. This is actually what you were told. Now, again, times have changed, thank God, right? My child was born in 1994. He was diagnosed in 1997. That's a long time ago. There have been a lot of changes and improvements. At the time, we were told not only that we should cure autism, but that we could cure autism if we did what Lovas told us. If we did ABA 40 to 45 hours a week, we would scrub it out of our child's system. Well, and what happens when year 10, you haven't accomplished your goal? What does that do to you as a parent? You feel that you failed them. You failed your child. And what's happened to the child in the ensuing decade, where they're told constantly they cannot be who they are? Hence the core dilemma between parents and children. The job of any parent is to accept and love your child unconditionally, but you're told that if you accept your child unconditionally, you're not being responsible. If you're a child, you experience, my parent doesn't accept me. My parent doesn't truly love me. In order to be loved, I must become different than who I am. This is an important autism rights advocate, a man who initiated the neurodiversity movement. This is what we hear when you pray for a cure. This is what we know when you tell us all of your fondest hope and dreams for us, that your greatest wish is that one day we will cease to be. Strangers you can love will move in behind our faces. Decades later, so now we know, as these children have emerged and expressed who they are, that up to 60% have average IQs or higher. We've got all kinds of statistics. These are people who are functioning in the world, and they're standing up for themselves and they're speaking out. With Neurodiversity movement, which is a very important movement. It's a social justice movement seeking civil rights, and they're taking the position, nothing about us without us. So where does that bring us? Drama over drama. Recently in the UK, in London, there was a production of a play that was written by a fellow who had been an interventionist for many years. He was a clinician, he was very intimate with autism and autism families, and he wrote a play called All in a Row. Now in this play, there was a young child, a character who was a young child with autism, and they elected to dramatize this by having that child portrayed as a puppet. It was kind of a theatrical device, which caused a huge stir and controversy. Now, this is a play which critics found to be very strong, powerful evening, needs to be seen. Both critics, it was a high quality project by those who saw it. However, before opening night, 12,000 people signed a petition calling for the theater to even cancel the show before they even see it. They slammed the play for focusing on the parents' experience versus Lawrence's experience. They also took great offense for the fact that the child was being played by a puppet, saying that it perpetuated this idea that autistic people are not human. and this is a huge backlash. He had written the script based on years of experience as a caseworker, felt that the best way to support severely autistic children was to represent this in a creative medium versus to ask an actor to mimic the condition. And here the autistic director issued a statement, issued an apology. So it was a big brouhaha in the UK. Which brings me to the first narrative fiction feature that I wrote and directed called Fly Away, a very personal movie dramatizing a single mother of an autistic teenage daughter contending with her child's adult future. What would sustain her child as well as herself into the future? And let's watch it did very well. It premiered at South by Southwest Film Festival, was nominated for Best Feature, and critical accolades from major papers, including several that recommended it for Academy Award nominations. Now, importantly, I didn't feel that I had the right to tell my child's story, so I told my own. I intentionally portrayed a boy versus a girl. The child is low functioning versus high functioning. My son is on the mildly impacted end of the spectrum. And before I even wrote it, I asked my son for his permission. And he said, fine, as long as I can play a role in it. And I also felt it was important to portray an underrepresented cohort of the autism spectrum. Most contemporary, commercial, mainstream films and television shows dramatize the Asperger, sort of high functioning, the Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory. Whereas that's a percentage of the people on the spectrum, but the larger percentage, the people who are going to need ongoing care and are going to need the compassionate understanding and acceptance of society at large, are not being dramatized. So how can we as a community ask for the help, support, tax-paying dollars of mainstream society if they think that everybody's going to go off to Silicon Valley and make the next big app? So also, families with lower functioning, more impacted children become more socially isolated. And most importantly, I'm not an autism tourist. I have direct life experience, insight, information, and investment and compassion. I'm not just somebody who's a voyeur coming to exploit this because I think it's a cool idea for a movie. So in my opinion, I proceeded with integrity. As I mentioned, many successful films and television shows have autistic characters that are played by neurotypical characters. In my movie, the actor playing the autistic girl is neurotypical. Let's watch the trailer.
Mandy's smart. Inside all of that, she is so smart. Up, over, that's it, that's right. Good job, Bud. Mandy, Daddy's here.
Mandy Pants!
She gets her first dose at 1 o'clock.
You're off the clock, babe. Relax. Take some time to, maybe get your hair done. Here we go.
I'm Jane. It's nice to meet you, Tim.
Tom. It's
Right.
okay. It's a nice place.
It's a small place.
It's small, it's beautiful.
You're dating yourself.
Well, it's much more fun to date someone else.
Right. I've lost the knack for social interaction.
It's learned behavior.
All the fits and the fights and the screaming in the night. You want to be here?
Well, this isn't really about
Yes,
your daughter.
it is. No, it really is.
This level of problem.
My daughter is not a problem. My daughter is a person. Hey, let go. Mommy,
You know what she did to me?
Mandy, breathe.
Freak show's over. You satisfied?
She's still such a little girl.
I never intended for this.
Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Your house is on fire, and your children will roam. Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home. Your house is on fire, and your children will
By the way, it's available to be streamed on Amazon Prime. So what's the problem? I was really blindsided when this April, I discovered this very long email chain, and I just excerpted some passages from it. There's a Facebook page for Fly Away the Movie. Autism being April being Autism Awareness Month, there tends to be more activity on the Facebook page, and there was this very long email chain in which neurodiversity, autistic adults, and parents got into a slugfest. And I'll just excerpt a few of them. Parent of an autistic child, did you consult autistic people making this movie? I haven't seen it, and it doesn't sound like something I'd waste a moment on. Parents of children do not speak for the community. Parents of autistic children are not part of our community. They do not speak for us. Blah, blah, blah. From the parents. True, parents of autistic children cannot speak for the spectrum children with verbal and normalized cognitive functioning, but for spectrum-linked children unable to speak for themselves, we often do speak on behalf of our children. And on and on and on. So there's an inherent problem and conflict here. And the question I ask, why is it challenging for higher functioning autistics to differentiate between their needs and that of lower functioning autistics? To accept that lower functioning autistics might not be differently abled, but disabled. And I want to first make really clear that I support the neurodiversity movement. It's important. I absolutely support everything that they're doing. But there's a difference between their experience of a different kinds of abilities and thinking and people who really cannot proceed through life and function autonomously and independently. Why is it difficult that for them to understand low-functioning autistics will not live independently, but will outlive their parents? And that parents of low-functioning autistics have profound, time-sensitive problems to solve, which will determine their child's quality of life when they outlive them. And that parents have a legitimate experience and a right to express it. So this is just a comment of sort of the problems that we're in right now in this kind of ongoing debate going on with the neurodiversity movement. The loudest voices in neurodiversity are causing an upheaval by insisting on strict interpretation of autism, what autistic people said, the world in black and white, for them or against them, et cetera. So we definitely are having a problem that's being seen in a lot of sectors of our society. On the other hand, is this an inherent problem in all adult-child-parent relationships? You know, the individuation process is a normative part of, and I don't know who's here parents, but I think that, or we've all been teenagers, and we can certainly remember, you know, the animus we felt towards our parents. It's part of becoming whole and being an independent adult. You must push away. Now, the closer that the child is to the parent, the more dependent and reliant they've been, the harder they have to push. And autistic children and their parents, particularly the mothers, are very entwined. These are very close relationships with the child. There's a lot of reliance. So one would understand the emotional need to push away. Maybe this is just inevitable. There's a little description of individuation. So what's the solution? Autistic filmmakers should tell their own stories. This is clearly the next step. As the autistic generation comes of age, we're starting to see a lot of memoirs being written. The next step is for autistic people to tell their own stories of their own experience themselves. I have students at NYU in the film school. There are also many programs that are being developed, like Film Academy 360, Exceptional Minds, Inclusion Films. These are programs, schools, studios that are training autistic people to work in the film industry and all the craft aspects, but also to be, visual storytellers themselves, writers and directors. But what are the challenges? Well, first and foremost, making feature films is one of the hardest things you can choose to do, full stop, I don't care who you are. So it's an incredibly competitive field. It's a very difficult industry. It's a high stress, high cost, high stakes. It requires tremendous collaboration. Being on a movie set, once you've gone through all the very difficult, stressful, unpredictable process of getting your film up and running and funded and cast with the actors that will guarantee the financing, being on the set is a constant source of unpredictable problems. You're constantly putting out fires. So in a way, you could say that what the demands of doing this work is antithetical to the hallmark qualities of autism. It's like the worst match you could imagine. So that makes it even more challenging. How about casting actors to play autistic characters, autistic actors playing autistic characters? Now, this is a really important issue. You know, we're living in an era where representation is critical in our society. I mean, since the Me Too movement in particular, the question of whose stories are told and by whom and who gets to tell them is a really important issue. And as a woman filmmaker who has had a very difficult time being able to come up in an industry, yes, I do know Harvey Weinstein. Yes, I was through all of that. I'm particularly sensitive for the needs for people of color, transgendered people, gay people to tell their stories directly, not to have their stories told about them, and to cast people to play characters who reflect them. However, there is a big challenge in casting autistic actors. First of all, if you want to tell a story about a child with autism, this is really challenging. When you're casting a neurotypical child, the SAG Screen Actor Guild rules require that there are fewer hours, so the ability to do work with a child is really circumvented. It makes the film much more expensive, much more difficult to produce. And when you have a child who is also having behavioral problems, which autistic children will do, think about the overstimulation of a set, think about all the lights, think about the unpredictability. This becomes a very, very challenging enterprise to make a film with a child. So, okay, you wouldn't really necessarily do that. So what about casting autistic adults? These are some of the challenges to inclusive casting. And again, I'm part of the Producers Guild of America. We actually had 2 workshops and panels about the topic of inclusion, of how do you tell stories with and employ autistic people to tell these stories, really to encourage we as producers who are facilitating these projects, who are generating these projects, to reach out to the community, to hire people with autism to be in the crews, to collaborate and produce films with autistic people. But let's recognize that there's going to have to be a lot of accommodations on the set to make this possible. And what's going to make that worth it to your financial investors? What would incentivize them to do it? Particularly when films are funded because of market value actors. That's the equation. What offsets the risk of the financial investment is that there's movie stars in your film. Are there autistic movie stars? To my knowledge, only Daryl Hannah and Dan Aykroyd have self-identified as autistic. And have they ever played autistic characters? To my knowledge, no. There is, to my knowledge, only one feature film that is made with autistic actors playing autistic characters. It's a brilliant movie, which I highly encourage everybody to see. You can find it online. It's called Keep the Change. It's a very low budget. It was made for way less than $1 million. It's really an indie film, played a couple film festivals and can be screened online. And it was made in a very atypical fashion. The filmmaker worked with a theater group for over a year. It was kind of what we call scripted improv. It was really catered for them. This is not something that can be easily replicated, and it doesn't match industry standards for commercial filmmaking and television making. In fact, they attempted to create a TV series, and they just encountered too many production problems. But it's a fantastic film, so we can watch a trailer from it.
Why did the bum vote for Obama? Because he wanted change.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the summer semester of Connections.
Who's the new initiate and what's wrong with him?
I don't belong there, Mom.
Just get it over with then so everything can go back to normal.
What would you like to talk about?
How about the Brooklyn Bridge?
That sounds wonderful.
We can both jump off the bridge.
This would be a really wonderful homework assignment.
I really, really want to do it with you because I find you really smoking hot and so sexy.
You do realize those people are weird in there, don't you? You don't want to be like that. You want to be normal like me.
I also have an LD.
What is that, like a venereal thing?
No, it's a learning disability.
Oh. It's my girlfriend, Sarah.
Your girlfriend?
Yeah, my girlfriend.
Yeah?
As my girlfriend, Sarah has special privileges.
Let me explain. This is part of her nature.
She said she really likes me, that cats me out.
She also describes the Holocaust as a bummer.
Yeah.
Don't expect anything other than dates and sex.
Tell me what you think of this.
Oh, I love it. It's absolutely delicious, Grovelicious, and really yummy in the tummy. My first time ever at the Brooklyn Bridge! I'm having a wonderful time!
That feels so sexually arousing.
Better you should find someone more advanced at things than you are.
I liked her because she was weird. I'm weird too. Don't you want to have all the things that normal people have?
Absolutely not.
What did the duck say to the bartender?
What?
Put it on my bill.
Multiple meanings!
It's really a great film, and I really encourage you guys to see. You can find it online. So where does this bring us, and where do we go from here? Must this be an either-or? Is there room for more than one chair at the table? Can both parents tell their stories legitimately and autistic people tell their stories? Is there room for neurotypical and autistic people to play autistic characters? And importantly, what stands in the way of mutual understanding and acceptance? Or is this a wound that goes so deep it cannot heal? Particularly when we're in a social, political, cultural moment where there's so much divisiveness. Is this just one more wound? I hope not.
What are your thoughts on Disney's new short on autism? I think it was called Float.
I confess I'm not aware of it. Can you tell us about it?
Oh, sure. There's, if you have Disney Plus, there's a filmmaker or a illustrator. His son had autism, and so he wanted to share the experience. You know how Pixar has those little shorts? They made a short called Float that talked about his son's experience with autism, and how the series starts is he's at a playground and his kid starts floating away, and all the other parents are like, what's going on here? And he's like very ashamed, and you know, it progresses through the dad's acceptance of his child. And as a parent of that, it at least for me, it was very powerful. It was able to very convey and illustrate like that pain and beauty that you experience as a parent, you know, and so I was just curious.
Certainly, there have been several projects where parents are sharing the experience of having a child. Certainly, the two films, narrative fiction films that I directed, Jack of the Red Hearts and Fly Away, are the parent's journey raising a child. Parenthood, the television series many of you probably know, Jason Katims actually has a son, an Aspie son, and there's a character who has an Aspie son. So I think that we've heard a lot of parents telling our story, and I think what the neurodiversity community is clamoring for, and frankly, I'm clamoring for also, is to have the story told by the autistic person. And I think that we just need to wait for that generation to come of age, develop the skill sets, and manage to do it. To my knowledge, there is not a feature film or television show about being autistic made by an autistic person. If anybody knows of one, I'd be eager to know. There might be shorts out there. I am aware that some of these film schools and film programs, there's some material that's coming out. I've yet to see any, but I'm all ears and eager for it to happen. I think it's the next phase, tier.
How would an autistic child apply to your school?
So I teach at New York University, NYU Tisch School of the Arts Film School. And so they would apply like any other student. And in order to make application to film school, first of all, you have to have a certain level of scores, GPA, et cetera, to even be considered eligible to submit a creative portfolio. And then the creative portfolio would be evaluated by our faculty, and then they'd be invited to attend. So we don't compensate, we don't accept people because they're autistic, nor would we not accept somebody because they're autistic. They would apply and be accepted like any other film student, like any other student who's able to do our demanding curriculum. It so happens that I have had several students in my classes who come to me and self-identify and say that they're autistic, although I had sort of a hunch that they were. But they just come in like any other student. Just like anybody else, yeah. And I think that that's happening more and more. I think that we're seeing, you know, this is the first generation that has had this level of intensive intervention, that are fulfilling their potential to this ability, that we're seeing their talents, their skills, who they are, and they're showing up in our society, ready to join us. Are we ready for them to join us? They're ready to join. Are we ready to receive? Inclusion Films is a fantastic program. Joey Travolta in LA started it, and I know there's several branches in different cities. And they also have a summer camp, and it facilitates social skills and social development as well as teaching skills, and it is for autistic children and adults. There are several other kinds of schools and programs like this that are specifically teaching filmmaking skills to autistic people, children and adults, and it serves a wide variety of development. I guess the question that I have, and I'm eager to know, to my understanding, the feature films that have come out of inclusion are written and or directed by neurotypical people and are staffed by autistic people. That's not the case. I'd love to know if any of these stories are stories that are written or directed by autistic people.
So the approach that our studios take within the training programs that we have are open to anybody with a developmental disability, actually are open to anybody who wants to come study with us. The approach that we take is hands-on and practical. We actually just did our first feature at all. It's coming out now. It was filmed about a year ago, last February, and featured RJ Mitty. The script for that was written by a man who, as far as I know, does not identify as having a disability, but the story is it's about a man who discovers that his birth mother had Down syndrome. So it's not written to try to give a voice to a character that's not representative of who they are in any way, I don't think. But for our studios, at least the ones, I run the 3 studios here in Northern California. Most of the films that we create are shorts, and they are written most of the time by our students, and then our students work on the crew. We are staffed by folks with and without disabilities. Some of the folks that work for me have gone through our programs and now work full-time as instructors or editors or various things. So, you know, I think that in the world of 20% of the population having a disability, I feel very strongly that our programs are doing a good job of representing that 20% across the board. We also just had one of our students, and I actually still can't talk about it, get cast on a series on Apple TV and shot for 3 months in New York. And the series is produced by J.J. Abrams and Sarah Bareilles and will be coming out in the next few months. So he plays a series regular and was on 9 of the 10 episodes that they shot. So I feel like, you know, there's a lot of the representation things that got brought up today are starting to switch. Like the pendulum is starting to swing. Producers are starting to recognize the need for accommodations, and you know that idea of all those things that may or may not have to happen on set are becoming less of a roadblock and more of a like, sure, let's do it.
This is fantastic news and exactly what I was hoping to learn in here, because it is the next step for everyone. And I hope that some of the students who are making the short films at Inclusion Films will, in the next few years, start to make features. And again, listen, the film school at NYU, these kids aren't ready to make features either, right? You know, and one of the things that we have to teach our students is that, hey, you're 22, 23 years old, you're not going to go out and make your feature yet, right? You have to learn your skills and develop maturity and all that. But it's on the horizon. So I think we all really look forward to as that starts to emerge. It's really great.
Hi, wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I think it's really interesting that as a professor in a film school, you're beginning to see what we, professors in psychology, psychiatry department, are beginning to see too. The first wave of amazing autistic scientists coming through. And so I was curious if you could help us just sort of share your insights on the kinds of things that have been good for you as you mentor such students, the kinds of challenges they have, the kind of unique strengths they have. And I know no one person is the same, of course, but just any observations on how you've been able to help people succeed and find their voice.
Wow. I mean, it's, I'll try and be succinct because we could, and I'd be eager to talk with you afterwards too. You know, the particular concerns, demands, and challenges of being in a film program are certainly different than an academic program. Our program is all about collaboration, and students have to work together in small groups, and it's open and dynamic, and it was really extremely challenging. So, especially when kids have to form their own groups. So, we've had several conversations. Our faculty has invited a neurodiversity advocate to come and speak to our faculty. We've had some of the faculty from the School of Social Work come and talk, so that we're trying to create awareness. I think the approach that we're taking as a faculty is that people need to come forward and self-identify, number one. You can't call out, label, or assume, by the way. You might be dead wrong. And so how do we create an environment that's welcoming so a person can feel totally comfortable coming forward and self-identifying? At NYU, there's actually something called Connections, which is a school-wide, not just film school, but school-wide cohort of autistic students who create a support group and an advocacy group for themselves. So encouraging and supporting that so that the university becomes an environment that's welcoming and destigmatizing, I think just kind of shifts the culture. The best that we can do is try and create an inclusive environment and culture, create awareness, try and educate faculty so that when they see behavior in a classroom that they're surprised by or confused by, it might occur to them, maybe this person is autistic, and then try and work with it so that the student who's calling out impulsively or is always wearing a hat and looking down, instead of just thinking this is an obnoxious student, is like, maybe there's a reason. And also so I think that's something that everybody is understanding, is that self-stimulating behaviors are important, they're self-soothing, they're necessary, so to tolerate and accept and allow these things into the classroom environment is one of the ways that we're trying to address that. But I think this is a big ongoing conversation, and there's no easy answer. I'm curious, what are you guys doing?
I mean, one thing is to try to identify what's a strength of an individual, what might be their challenges, and match some of the job things that they're doing to those. I mean, we have one person working in our lab who's minimally verbal, but he's great at entering data. And so he's been really successful and happy doing that. We have another person who had some issues with, didn't work for a while, but spent a lot of time doing programming, and he's amazing and has been helping us with that. So I think it's like finding a balance of what people like to do, and then taking the time to work through and help them and train. And then with students, it's probably more, again, a matter of just being patient and listening and helping them to find what they love, like you would for any student, and really relish the different viewpoint people give you. So.
We had lunch with the graduate students and the fellows, and we were talking about the sort of shift in attitudes and therapies from, the days of Lovas in 1970s and put it on extinction. And one of the big shifts that I really wish had been happening when my son was little was a focus on accepting the child, looking for the strengths, versus constantly focusing on the deficits and trying to fix that. And I think that the more that we are shifting the perspective and building on strengths, the happier and healthier and more whole everyone will be.
So my question was around, particularly I was watching, or I saw something around Al Roker, and he's very vocal about his son having autism. I didn't know if you knew that. And his son is like 17 years old, and I've just watched the show periodically and seen him just mission his son. And he made a vow like earlier this year to be more patient with his son. And so I wanted to just see what your thought process was around just being patient with your child, and then also how do you relate with others who have platforms and are more high profile about having a child with autism, and do you all support each other?
Well, that's really interesting about algorithms. I think I sort of heard that in the back of my mind. I'm like, oh yeah, I think I knew that. That's great that he is doing that. I so totally support any celebrity who comes forward and shares this kind of private information in a public way, but I also completely respect the privacy of those who choose not to, right? So I was sort of part of the Hollywood community for a long time, and I do know of some very significant celebrities, and I sort of was like, oh damn, if they would only come forward, it would help the cause so much, but you know, I get it. This is a personal decision to make, but I think it's terrific when people come forward and express, which is why I chose to tell these stories. I feel like if we don't share, then how do we learn? And if we don't learn, then how can we support and how can we grow? So if we can become, and this is the gift of storytelling, right? What dramatic storytelling does best is to put each other into the shoes of the other, right? We're narrowing the divide between you and me, right? We're inside of an experience. And when we can understand and feel an experience, our heart might grow that much bigger, and we will be that much more interested in spending our tax dollars. When we see a kid having a tantrum in a shopping mall, maybe we'll be that much more interested to think perhaps that person has autism and say, can I help? Versus what a brat, shut your kid up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I am very interested when anybody comes forward in a public way to share experience. I don't know that I engage particularly with anybody, you know, in that way. I mean, I have close personal friends and we share our journey and then I make my movies. You had another question though. What was the other part of the question? Oh, patience, yeah, well, yeah. I think that every parent of every child needs to learn how to be patient. Including my mother, damn it. She needs to be a lot more patient with me.
So I'm curious about kind of the ethical dilemma of sharing truth as a parent, because I know that for myself personally, the best stories that are the most heart-wrenching or hilarious or the best stories are also the most embarrassing stories for my son. The things that, I mean, he's 11, so he's not quite fully grasping that we talk about you in IEPs and to support groups and all that sort of thing, and he hasn't quite fully grasped it. But I know he's going to hit that age where he's going to be, Mom, stop talking about me. And yet, talking about him is one of the most cathartic things for me as a parent. And so I'm curious as to how you've maneuvered that kind of almost ethical dilemma of sometimes I need to share these heart-wrenching, hilarious things that happen, but it would be mortifying if my son knew that the world knows whatever hilariously horrible thing that he's done.
So that is a real issue. And there's difference between public and private, right? So of course with close friends and privately, I feel perfectly privy to talk about whatever in the cone of silence of friendship. I'm sure he says a whole lot of things about me too. The core reason that when I stepped forward to write and direct Flyaway, I made the story about a girl, not a boy, and the relationship of a mother and her daughter versus mother and son, and made the child much more impacted by autism than mine, was so that I would not be telling his story, because I felt I didn't have that right. But I could tell my story, and I felt like I have the right to that. And I asked him about it before I made it, so I got his permission. And if he had said, no, I don't want you to do this at all, I wouldn't have. So that was part of it. And I've not made autobiographical. The second film that I made was brought to me. It was a script that somebody else wrote, and the circumstances of the story do not reflect my own circumstances, except that I have an insight and understanding into autism, firsthand direct experience of raising a child. But no, so I think that was a way around it. I mean, the thing about with fiction is that you can smush things around and make believe, and it's fiction. Memoir is a different thing, So I was one of the producers of the documentary Autism, the musical, and I was very clear that I did not want my son or my family to be in it, right? So that's another way to protect privacy. We weren't going to be the subject of the doc. So these are some ways, and I think that you're right to be concerned. I think another thing that I wish I had been more sensitive to was when he was little, taking into consideration that when I was talking about him, he was listening. And I think that's something that as parents, we can remind ourselves. So that's a mistake that I feel that I've made, was having conversations assuming that he wasn't. That he was in autism land. He wasn't in autism land, he was listening. But it's a somewhat different issue, but yeah.
I jotted down several films, including yours, that I'm excited to see. Would these be age appropriate or interesting for children as well? And if not, are there films or books that you would recommend for school age or high school kids to help them with the perspective?
I do not believe that my films or Keep the Change are appropriate for children. They may be appropriate for high school, and somebody's very mature. Are they appropriate for autistic children? I don't know. I think they'd have to watch it first. Because these are, again, the stories of parenting a child. And I don't know how an autistic person would feel seeing this story. I think that's something to be thoughtful about. Autistic child, or autistic teenager. I think that both films, Jack the Red Hearts and Fly, were very appropriate for mature middle school and high school neurotypical people to understand. One of the reasons that I made both of them is to increase understanding and awareness. In terms of television or TV, films or television that is being content that's being made for children's audience that describes and helps increase understanding acceptance, Sesame Street has been doing a great job. Sesame Street has an autistic character, and I think that they have a whole nother segment now, so Sesame Street is a really great place to look. And I think there might be, you guys who have children this age are probably much more aware than I am of what is out there. But I think it's something that's coming into mainstream, so I think that there is children's programming that's having autistic characters more and more. And I welcome anybody knowing about it.
Thank you so much for being here, and I'm so excited that you were here. So first of all, thank you for sharing your story. And I want to know if you can tell us what you're doing next. What are you working on, and where do you see in the future?
Well, it's not to do with autism. I have been working for 3 years writing a feature film, an independent, character-driven, independent narrative fiction feature film. And it takes a long time to put a movie project together. And after being here in Sacramento, I'm going to LA for the week to meet with an agency that is interested in helping me to raise the money for it. And if there is, whatever, if the gods of movies are shining upon me, it's something I'll be able to shoot in the summer, and it will be out next year. And it has absolutely nothing to do with autism. It's called Amity Falls, so remember that. And it's inspired by a true event. It's a fictional story, but it's inspired by a true event that happened in the Catskill Mountains of New York State, where I have a house, where in the spring of 2016, some students in a local high school petitioned the school board to change their school mascot from a warring Injun to an eagle. And everything was going fine when they brought the petition to the school board, and the adults in the community, not even the parents of the other students, but the adults in the community got wind of this change. It erupted into culture wars. And so it's a very, I think, pertinent story. Even though it happened in 2016, it feels almost more relevant, and in a way, even more so, because the characters in 2016, it's like, we now can see that there's the tremors of an earthquake that's about to strike, and they don't know what's coming at them, but we do. And it was perhaps the last moment when we all felt as a society we could still talk this through and figure it out. So that's the movie that I'm trying to make. It's an intergenerational, interracial ensemble story, trying to make for a low budget. God save us all. So wish me luck.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.